Panchen Rinpoche has his mission as a national leader, second national leader in revitalizing and revising the entire Tibet society. That song and the lyric, even today, both Tibetan diaspora and inside the people, that song can unify them emotionally. To take all the Lama to Beijing, and then in the morning, they hosted a meeting to refuse His Holiness Dalai Lama's recognition of the 11th Panchen Lama. Gunthang Rinpoche's friend. And then this guy called Jiang Zemin at that time. Lipen says, arrest him, what to do now?
Welcome to Roof of the World, Tibet in Context, a podcast by the Foundation for Non-Violent Alternatives. Professor Gyal Lo, thank you so much for joining us for a second time on our podcast, Tibet in Context, for a different conversation. So just to give a brief introduction to you, Professor Gyal Lo, although probably by now you need very little introduction. Professor Gyal Lo was born in Amdo in Eastern Tibet and has a master's in Tibetan language and culture from the Northwest Minorities University in Lanzhou. Later studied in Toronto for a master's and a PhD in education in sociology at the University of Toronto before going back to Tibet and studying and teaching at Yan'an Normal University from 2017 to 2020, when the situation became untenable and he finally had to leave Tibet. And since then, he has been using his extraordinary experience of seeking to protect Tibetan language and culture inside Tibet to bear witness to international governments, UN committees, and others of the situation inside Tibet, the dangers for the survival of Tibetan religious civilization. And we're here today to talk about two religious leaders, two remarkable people, the 7th Gungthang Rinpoche and the 10th Panchen Rinpoche, who were both close to the 14th Dalai Lama. And Professor Gyal Lo, you have just recently been in Dharamsala in India and have presented your work, your book, about the life of Gunthang Rinpoche to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Gunthang Rinpoche is well known to many Tibetans, particularly from Amdo. He was a very important reincarnate Lama. And you knew him yourself personally. And I was wondering if we could start by you talking about your memories of Gunthang Rinpoche and why he was such an extraordinary figure, and something about his remarkable life.
Thanks very much, Kat, for having me. This is, I think, something this life experience is extraordinary. Where the Gunthang Rinpoche and the 10th Panchen Rinpoche, they are the leader inside Tibet. After His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama exiled in India, the Gunthang Rinpoche, the Chinese government, Chinese or the CCP put him in jail since 1959 for 21 years. And he wanted to remain with the Tibetan people. Then the Chinese put him in jail for 21 years. And then in 1979, he got out of the jail. And then he served significantly for the Tibetan people in revising or revitalizing Tibetan social culture, the language, religion, and the social orders, all other aspects of the Tibetan society. as a right hand of the 10th Panchen Rinpoche. I think that normally people, when the people came out from the jail, they be quiet, has less encouragement to contribute to the nation. But Gunthang Rinpoche is different. Even he was been jail for 21 years. When he came out, he was has more passion for the nation of Tibet. So therefore, I prepared when I was inside Tibet from 2015. From the sociological perspective, I prepared to write his biography. In the English, I put the title like A Life of Decolonization and Reconciliation, the social political contributions and the experience of the sixth Gunthang Rinpoche in PR China from 1951 to 2000. Let me read his one of the promise to the Tibetan people. He says, I never feel regretful in facing the denigrate and the difficulty for Tibetan people. As a Lama, such a Lama who promised his people and his nation in this way. I think he received warmly the 5 times with the delegation from exile government of Tibet side. He hosted as a receiving the song returning home. All delegates, he warmly greeted them and then give advice how to reach Chinese government, how to have a conversation or how to communicate with them. And also, at that time, the Panchen Rinpoche has his mission as a national leader, second national leader in revitalizing and revising the entire Tibet society that damaged by under the Cultural Revolution for 10 years. That's not the simple task for them. The Panchen Rinpoche has a larger and a broader view on the Tibet as a nation, to revise it, their culture, the language, the religious institution, and the social orders, and also tried to lead the Tibetan people engage their own economic system. This is not a simple leadership he had. So each time Panchen Rinpoche visited all Tibetan area, in Wizang, Kham, Amdo, all area, we go visit with him as a right hand. And he's the pillar of his Panchen Rinpoche's idea to implement it on the ground.
So the Panchen Rinpoche in 1962 wrote this extraordinary 70,000 character petition, which was published and translated by Tibet Information Network some years ago, which Mao Zedong described as a poisoned arrow aimed at the heart of the party. And so that was why the Panchen Lama then was imprisoned for so many years until his death in 1989. So Gungthang Rinpoche was his right hand and someone who traveled with him and who assisted him in this respect for keeping language and literature alive during this cataclysmic time. And I wonder, so he had a remarkable life. He died, Gungthang Rinpoche died at the age of 74 in 2000. So he was born in the 1920s. And he lived through this period as a child, as a monk who was recognized as a Lama, as a young child, presumably. And so he lived through this era before China invaded Tibet in 1949 to 50. And then he lived through those years of resistance. But he was imprisoned early on, wasn't he? He was imprisoned before the Cultural Revolution began. Why was he imprisoned? I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that very dark period.
Okay. I think the Gunthang Rinpoche is a golden chair of the Labdang Monastery in 1952. And then into 1954 and 5, he was invited by Zhou Enlai, the Central Chinese government. He attended 2 times in the conference in Beijing. So those Zhou Enlai and other top leaders see this guy is a young man, very talented, very brave. And if let this man, young man, exercise his intellectual knowledge and his capacity in the society, this will greatly empower the Tibetan society. For China side, they think this is the stake of the later threater. So then the Zhou Enlai called at that time the Sichuan provincial police department to arrest him, put in jail. I clearly remember he told me the story. At that year, he was in Amcho Chinese monastery. One guy who's a Tongzhanpu, the United Front officer in Aba, they called him, we have something to discuss with you. You have to go to the Chengdu. And then the United Front office of the Aba Tibetan prefecture government took him to the Chengdu. They kept him in the hotel for several years, day and a night. And then one night, they put him in the Beijing jeep car. At that time, he was thinking, oh, maybe this time they are taking me to a tour for the enjoyment. But actually, the car went up in the hill, and in the middle of the mountain, I think, they finally reached the big, giant iron door. At the front of the door, one guy, Chinese guy who wearing the uniform and holding another color of the uniform. And then the driver asked him to get off the car. And then when he walked to that door, the other man who handled the uniform, another color of the uniform to him, change your clothes, wear this. And then they push him into the door. Then he realized that's the jail, So they kept him in Chengdu in that jail about 23 days like that, and then they transferred him to Gansu Lanzhou, and then from Lanzhou they transferred him to Pinliang, which is the large prison campus there. They transferred him there, and then he stayed there 21 years until 1979. It's the personal story I heard. He says the only person, his sister, walked 1,000 miles and then carried the zamba for him every year.
So his sister went back and forth to the prison.
Yeah.
Then every year carrying the bags of sampa.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also he was in prison all through that period of famine when food must have been terribly scarce. So the sister must have kept that sampa aside somehow.
I had many conversations with him because I have a very close friendship, close relationship with him. One day he told me, each time when his sister arrived in Pinliang in his prison campus gate, when he get out to pick up the jamba from his sister's hand, he cried. That's only the lifetime he cried. He says, I never cried any brutal situation, facing any brutal situation that could not make me cry. Only each time for 20 years, his sister brought the jamba for him every year to the gate of the prison. He cried. When he clearly told me, I remember he said, the first time when they put him in the room, in the prison room, he doesn't know any Chinese single word. And then the people, the inside, other people, criminal people say, hey, what's your name? He doesn't know. Where do you want to sit? He doesn't know. That, and then gradually they put him in another room. That's the professor, I think, from Lanzhou University, the Chinese professor. And then he started learning Chinese in jail. In the jail, he learned 4 skills. One is a Chinese writer, Chinese characters, learning. And then he learned Karl Marx's economic of the politics and the dialectical of the materialism. Gradually he be able to study those series. At the same time, he tried to be a shoe repair. And then he also plays music.
How could he play music? What instrument?
Yeah, he has only the person who has a knowledge and a skill to produce a Tibetan musician and a music, in Tibetan way. He thinks that's a very important part of a Tibetan culture. Even in jail, he kept them very well.
And did he sing, or how did he get hold of an instrument?
He be able to write a very famous lyric of the song, Tibetan song, traditional song. And also he played the instruments for music. And then when he came out in the jail, he first stand up outside of the jail campus and on the soil stage. His first time he played the instrument and the music, singing song. Kat, that song and the lyric, even today, both Tibetan diaspora and inside the people, that song can unify them emotionally.
What is the name of the song?
Akupema.
Oh, Akupema, of course.
Yeah. I remember the Akupema, the song and the instrument he passed to a very famous Tibetan musician. We call him as Penguin. I remember in my book, I wrote about this. He passed his own knowledge about the music and how to write the Tibetan music and the lyric. And then Akupengula, he recruits the students across Tibet. over 1,000 now. That's why the inside Tibetan people, the outside Tibetan people like to play the music, the music instruments. When they singing the akipema, that song of the akipema, in outside the diaspora, inside the people, they significantly unify the people emotionally. The song he written in from his, from his hand.
And in his prison cell.
Yeah. And then after he get out of jail, he produced many of the lyric and the sound a lot. I don't need to count every song here. And at the same time, I think he's a unique Lama. Someone who knows the modern knowledge of the economic, of the politics, and the dialectical materialism. That's why when he get out of jail, he often give a talk to the public on the ground. He says, send the kids to the school. Our young generation need to receive the modern education. Modern education will save our nation. If we have our nation be stabilized, then we can have a monastery and all other religious culture and other culture to be practiced safely. He is the only Lama throughout the Tibetan history, I think. He knows the deep religious understanding and also the modern Karl Marx theory.
And Professor, did he ever talk to you about how it was for him when he came out of prison? Because that was after the Cultural Revolution had ended, and he must have been shattered by the destruction that he witnessed upon coming out of prison.
Yeah, he told me first came out when he met with 10th Panchen Rinpoche. They naked out and then showing how the Chinese beat them in jail. They showed to each other, shared the emotional moment, the experience in the jail. And then I also remember he clearly told me, he said, I think I'm lucky because when I was in jail throughout during the period of the Cultural Revolution. Otherwise, maybe they killed me. Cultural Revolution in the jail saved him from the Cultural Revolution. He told me that, like, the first day he get out of jail, he on the way traveled back into his hometown. He on the way, he visits every villager who greets him, pay the homage to him. I clearly remember he visited my village. At that time, I'm such a young age boy that I first time saw his face. We had many long conversations with 10th Panchen Rinpoche to make a plan how to revitalize and how to revise the Tibetan culture that damaged throughout the Cultural Revolution.
And you also knew the 10th Panchen Rinpoche as well.
I met him one time. He put his two hands on my head. Boy, do good study. He told me.
How old were you at that time?
Because I opened the door of the car for him, and then he put his both hands on my head, saying, "Boy, do good study." At that time, I think I'm a young age boy at that time. It's such an encouragement for me.
And did you keep in touch with Gungthang Rinpoche? You encountered him many times then in his later life.
I think that I am the from my undergraduate students until he passed away. I was a faculty member of the Tibetan Department of Language in Northwest University for Nationality in Lando. I think I had a 15 years relationship with him. From 1985, 85 or 86, I think, around that time, until 2001. He passed away. I clearly remember each time when he traveled, returned to his residency in Lando from outside, I was always there in his residence. On the weekend, I eat jamba and beef, everything from his house on the weekend. And sometimes chat over time if there's no people to be audience. So we talked his story. He talks about, and then another story I will share with you with him. He's Gunthang Rinpoche. I think in 1994, before my field trip to Lhasa, he gave me 500 yuan for the Lawrence. While handing his 500 yuan to me, he was saying that do good field work, do good observation in the society. Don't do like a pure religious tour. When you come back, bring me a good gift. That kind. And then I did. At that time, within Lhasa, I met all those great scholars in Lhasa, in TR. Gunthang Rinpoche, Choruchelam Rinpoche, Chapi Chetong, the great scholar, and Shamba Chenli, Shamba Pont, all those great scholars in Lhasa. Particularly, one day I was be able to meet with Gunthang Rinpoche. He told me, "You're a young boy, but you got a good education. Keep in your mind. This is your task from me. Our society has a problem. The social development is so slow, but we have a rich traditional culture. Why? What's wrong? There's a wrong problem between our culture and the social development. This is your task. You have to find out. You have to identify what's the problem is." On the day back to Lanzhou from the Lhasa trip, I brought the picture of the school in Samye, beside the Samye monastery. There's a primary school. Has no window, has no door for classroom. Students are knelt down. No table, no chairs. And then teachers are teaching there. At that time, I feel so sad. I cried. First time, at a young age, I cried in 1994. And then I gave the 10 Chinese yuan to those teachers to buy a book or a notebook for every student. I took the 50 photos. And then on the way back to Gunthang Rinpoche, I present those pictures. Look, Gunthang Rinpoche says, "That's a good gift. That's a good gift. You did a real observation of the key issue with our nation." Before that, I think in 1994, he was giving the Karachaka in Sanko, in Labrang place. That time, almost 500,000 people there gathered in that grassland. As a sociologist, I call that as the largest social gathering in Tibetan history.
So historic gathering, and the sort that would never be able to happen now.
Yeah. And then during the Kalachakra teaching, I remember he clearly said, one day we all hope His Holiness Dalai Lama return to our homeland and then to give the Kalachakra for us. Yeah, in 1994, July 7, July 11, I think, I clearly remember, from July 11 to 15.
And his devotion to the Dalai Lama eventually did cause him to fall from grace in the party, because he was on the top political advisory body standing committee of the CPPCC. And I understand that when His Holiness recognized the new child Panchen Lama, the 11th Panchen Lama in 1995, is it correct that Gungthang Rinpoche refused to accept the Chinese demand to recognize their choice of Panchen Lama?
Yes, certainly he did. One story he shared with me, it's painful. One day evening, they using the helicopters to take all the Lama to Beijing, and then in the morning, they hosted a meeting to refuse His Holiness Dalai Lama's recognition of the 11th Panchen Lama. And beside him, it's Gyal Lo. He told him he was young. He needed to still lead the monastery. So he told the Gyal Lo, said, you need to play the game with them, because you need historical task to lead all those over 108 branch monastery. So you collaborate. I'm old enough. I don't want to collaborate with them. I'm old enough now. He told him that on the way into the meeting hall. When sitting in the meeting, and then the Chinese top leader hosting the microphone saying every Lama needed to say about their opinion, His Holiness Dalai Lama's recognition of the 11th Panchen Lama. The Gyal Lo said his way, and then the top leader handled the microphone to the Gunthang Rinpoche. At that time, Gunthang Rinpoche feel like he clearly told them like this: I'm already old enough. I don't want to be in the jail again. This is his answer. Then they could not continue the conference. You know, that's he. So on that day, he faced the brutal situation. The people, primary of the Li Pin says, arrest him. And then the head of the United Front officer was a Gunthang Rinpoche's friend. And then this guy called Jiang Zemin at that time. Li Pin says, arrest him, what to do now? And then at that time, Jiang Zemin said,
Li Peng, the senior Chinese leader at the time. Yeah.
And then Jiang Zemin says, don't arrest him. We already have this problem enough. If you arrest him, you're going to create some more problem. Don't arrest him. And then his friend, head of the United Front officer, sent him back to the Landu, and then he could not stay overnight in Landu, his residence. He directly went to the Labrang Koche, on the mountain in the meditation house. He stayed there almost 8 months. By doing that, old enough, and then he's got cancer with his kidney.
Right.
That's the consequence.
But this was a very simple meditation hut that monks used for retreats.
Yeah.
That he went to, very remote. Yeah.
He came out from the meditation room after they chose their Chinese Panchen Lama, and that boy became a monk in Gungthang temple, the ceremony. And then he came out. You know, he got a very perfect Mandarin speaking skill. He communicated with those Chinese leaders well. So the Jiang Zemin and those other leaders will have a good connection with him. Because it's a language skill. Communicate those well, and then he resumed his bad relationship caused that on those that meeting. Later, he resumed his relationship and just tried to make a good connection, and then ask them to appoint the Tibetan people in the all levels autonomous region, Tibet autonomous prefecture, and the counties. After, the consequence of he passed away in 2001, and then China dramatically removed those Tibetan officials or the head of the government in Tibetan autonomous prefecture government and the counties.
So they no longer had Rinpoche's protection.
No.
After his death.
Rinpoche passed away. Their backbone is gone. That's why I'm calling. Naturally, he took the responsibility, national responsibility, from the 10th Panchen Rinpoche when he passed away. Yeah. There are many more stories. I'm outlining his bio story. Later, you can see it. Yeah.
And I also just finally wanted to mention, Professor, that the reincarnation of Gunthang Rinpoche, the child, there was a child who was officially chosen by the Chinese side and at the monastery soon after the death of the 6th Gunthang Rinpoche. And there was a rather tragic coda to this story in 2012 on October the 13th. This child's grandfather, Tamdin Dorji, set fire to himself and died in a wave of self-immolations across the plateau. And he did so outside a monastery.
Yeah. It was a sad moment. It's affected many families. This family is since the 7th Gunthang Rinpoche's grandfather. This is not only single families issue. It's affected a large number of the population, because the Labdang monastery has over 108 branch monastery across Amdo and the Kham. So this is a big effect. I think those old generation, no matter whose father or whose grandfather, the loyalty of the nation, loyalty of His Holiness Dalai Lama is no question about it. Even today, they are young generation, age 85, 88, 89, 90. They still wishing to see His Holiness face, a real face, before they pass away. This is a mystery of the nation in modern history, I think. Now, the entire society under the control, systematic control, surveillance by people, by technology, by personnel, by government, by institutions. And our people, now I think the situation is the such brutal dilemma now, whether you to be assimilated or you remain the poor in the village with no hope. That's the entire population are facing now. Mm-hmm. So it's just another age of the time in the history of Tibet. So those great Lama, they left its legacy, and no one now be able to continue to carry on that because of the social, the cultural environment that have been diluted.
Well, Professor, I'd like to thank you personally for your exemplary work in telling these stories and honoring the lives of these great figures, so important to Tibetan civilization, in your own life and your own work. And in this way, with bringing the book that you've written about Gungthang Rinpoche to His Holiness in India, you were the connection, you were that vital connection, bringing those threads together of those lives and those stories. And we're really grateful that you could speak to us again today. So thank you so much.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Xin